Right, hello and welcome to Discover Dorico for March 2020. Apologies, I did forget to mention for the US and Canada colleagues, we haven't changed our clocks yet in the UK, so sorry about that. It's me, look. I thought you'd like to see a familiar smiley face. So audio check, make sure you can check and hear everything. You should, if you go in the bottom corner down here, your bottom right corner, you should be able to click on the cog and make sure it's on 1080p, because then when we're showing the screen in a second, then that should look clear. I will be reading the comments, which are just over here, so let me just have a check. I can see people, sound is perfect, thank you for letting me know. I know lots of people are joining us and starting up live streams and information videos at the moment, but we've been doing these for a couple of years. I thought it'd be good to have this session for some sense of normality, even if we're all locked down or not able to go out much. As it's a current hot topic, today we'll be talking about distancing, but as we're already social distancing, this session is about staff and system distancing on a page, or in our case, in a frame. So we can go to the screen and move my notes out the way for a second, and let's carry on. I find it a little quiet. I will turn me up. Hopefully that's okay, and I'll just let me adjust at this end. And let me know if that continues to be okay. Today's March the 25th, 2020. The current version of Dorico I'm using is going to be version 3.1.10. There's a couple of people who are saying they're getting no sound or video. Let me know if I will tweak it at my end. If you're not watching this live, skip ahead in the video. I will adjust the shout if that's any better. Let's keep going. Right. Yes, March 25th today, current version 3.1.10, and while lots of the options we'll be looking at are layout options, so they are available in Dorico SE, Elements and Pro, parts of this session will also just use Engrave mode, and of course those things are only available in Pro. Just making sure I'm not going to kill anybody with the sound. There we go. Yes, and for this session, because we're talking about spacing and that kind of thing, then I may well be opening a can of worms. In fact, there's one. Yes, these things should all be valid for Dorico 2. In fact, in a lot of cases, these are valid all the way back to version 1. So, for example, the version 1 version history, which is here, has the vertical spacing options and some of these things in there. There are some things that appeared in version 2, but yes, you should be good for any of those. I just well, hang on 2 seconds as well, while you confirm if you've all got audio and video. I think we're okay, so that's good. This topic of spacing, staff spacing and system spacing has come up a few times over the last month on social media and by email. I suppose I should have a disclaimer first. I'm not a publisher. You might have done many more pages of layout than I ever will, but I hope to make things quicker and easier for you when you're using Dorico and that you understand where the Dorico options are and that kind of thing. Any files I showed today, like this one, for example, are not necessarily problems or things people have done incorrectly. I'm certainly not looking to shame anybody. There are often multiple ways to achieve similar results. I'd like to thank the people who sent in files. I'm not going to show all of the ones I've been sent in, but I was sent in some files by people, and thank you very much, because they've saved me a bunch of time setting up some of these things. I might also have tweaked some of the files that you've sent me to show particular things and that kind of thing. So I'm not looking to shame anybody. I'm just looking to see if I can help speed up your processes and make you aware of some other options and that kind of thing. If you disagree with any of the things I'm saying on my methods, please let me know. I'd like to learn from you as well. So if you have real world cases that we haven't considered, and this maybe this is the first of more than one of these sessions on kind of spacing and solving particular things and particular issues. That's fine. I don't want to keep you all day. So after this session, if you've got a problem with a layout that hasn't been covered, please let me know, as always, on discoverdorico@steinberg.de. That's discoverdorico, all one word, at steinberg.de. And we can look at some other cases if there are some. So let's have a look at some of the options in Dorico. Try to demystify these available options for spacing things. Excuse me. The first couple of things, just so you know what some of the things are I'm using. And I will turn on some of my keystroke shortcuts here. So when I press shortcuts for things, you'll see them. So, for example, in any particular file, there's a default shortcut for this system track that often when I'm doing spacing type things, I'll turn off. So that's Option or Alt T. That's available in the view menu, so you can turn that one off. Also, as I probably mentioned before, I've got a shortcut for turning off system breaks and things, because sometimes I don't want to see them when I'm doing page layout type things. So I've set up my own shortcut for this view signpost, hide signposts option. And that's available in the properties. So in key commands, if you look, for example, for signposts, then you can set yourself a shortcut for this. And I find that one particularly useful when I just want to look at what the page looks like and then need to just toggle on and off all of the signposts to be able to access them. Also, while I'm in here in the main properties section, there's an option here for preferred unit of measurement. When you're looking at, so for example, later on, when we're looking at things like the staff spacing options, so these options here, and they're displayed in millimeters, but sometimes we'll be talking about spaces, or you might want to talk about points. In the options up here, preferred unit of measurement, you can change these. So for example, if I change to points, then you can show in points. Close that, get out of the way. There you go, it's updated to points. You can have millimeters, you can have inches if you want, you can have centimeters. I'm going to choose millimeters, which is my default. Also in here, this is where you'll find your default paper size. Now this is normally automatic and we'll pick it up from the preferences on your computer. But if you need to choose between a North American or international option to override the settings that you have on your computer, then that's no problem as well. And that will set things like your letter or A4 sized paper by default. So you might want to look at that one. I will be just check read what the comments watching on a big screen. Hello from the Maldives. That sounded nice. And can we show how to align multiple instrument bar lines when using different time signatures for one instrument? Might not get to that one in this case, but if I don't, drop me an email on discoverdorico@steinberg.de. And yeah, if I don't get to that one, just drop me an email and we'll figure that one out for you. First thing I just want to look at is kind of defining the space that you're working in. So you've got the page. We were talking about the page setup and the paper size and that kind of thing. So you've got, of course, the layout options. We're going to spend a lot of time in layout options today, so you'll want the shortcut, which is Command-Shift-L. If you can leave this dialog open, so if you have a second monitor, you can move it off to a second monitor, leave it open while you're working on things. You can just choose your options and press apply, and then carry on working on the file if you want to. But before we even do some of that, I just wanted to kind of do a quick explanation type of thing of the page itself. So here's a quick slide. So the page in Dorico, you've got these the kind of grey faint lines around the edges. So those are the page margins. So all the way around the page, you've got these page margins first, and you can't go outside those page margins. So all of the frames and things that you put on the page, these green text frames, the blue music frames, they all sit inside the page margins. And then there is also music frame margins, so page margins and music frame margins. The music frame margins is the top and the bottom, and it's the distance between the top of the music frame and the top of the staff here, or for example there's one at the bottom as well. So there's a top and a bottom music frame margin, and there's top, left, right, bottom for the page margins, and they're all in this layout options dialog. So again, Command-Shift-L. So the in the page setup here, you've got page margins and music frame margins. They appear in these sections here, and this is where you'll find that you can set the options in here. These aren't actually the defaults; these have been edited for this particular file that I was sent. But yes, you might want to set the spaces of some of these, because these kind of things are also going to define how much space you have on the page. And if you want to, experiment, try one of our files or one of yours, print out a page, see how comfortable you are with page margins. And there are also some recommended guidelines if you want to use those kind of thing from Mola and Behind Bars and people like that. So that was the first thing, was just kind of define the space of the things that you're working in and what you're doing. Also, check the master page template. So let me just show you what I mean. So in another file here, which I will just bring up. This was, again, another file I was sent, so thank you very much. Now, in this particular file, the kind of things that you might want to check, let's just make this fill the whole screen, and this one's scrolling in a different direction, but that's all fine. In Engrave mode, you want to check all of these areas for titles and composer and all these kind of things. So what I would suggest you do really is edit these master pages. Define at the beginning, before you're worried about how much space you've got on the page to put the music in, define your titles, subtitles, define how much space you're going to need at the top, because that's going to define how big this music frame is. In fact, you're normally using the one on the right. That will define how big the music frame is. Do you want the copyright at the bottom? All of those kind of things. So define your page margins, potentially at this point the music frame margins, or you might want to adjust those ones later, but also, like I said, all of these little areas, and you'll also want to do not only the first page, but you'll also down here want to do the default page, because this is every subsequent page. So the Dorico default, of course, is to have page numbers on the top left and the top right, but you'll also normally have a flow title at the top and things like that. You might not want that. You might want a project title. You might not want it at all. You might want your page numbers at the bottom. Define all of these things, and whether, for example, your music frame is allowed to overlap with any of those if you think you've got the space. But define those kind of things first, because defining that size of the music frame is going to make a big difference later on, and it's not really the kind of thing you want to change too much later on. Also, you might want to check, for example, if you've been experimenting with things, there's a title page here. And also on page 4 here, there's a page left intentionally blank. This is a brilliant example. Now, this one, there's nothing potentially wrong with this, but for speed, you now have 2 red overrides over here. I wouldn't, if possible, use overrides. Ideally, define these pages that you want as a master page. So make some new master pages in here. Because you're then following a template. So if you want to use this page left intentionally blank, somewhere else on the project, you can reuse that by using that same master page again, which then means that when you need to make a change to it, you can just change the template once and both pages will update. At the moment, this is now an override, which is going to potentially cause you issues later on. But also, now, and this is Dorico 3, in fact 3.1, there's now master page sets. So if you've defined these kind of things and you want to import and export them into other projects, then you can do that from down here, so that you can define your title page how you normally want it, for example, or normally for this type of project, and then you can import it later into another project, and you also won't have overrides. There are also some things that potentially, if you're looking at some of these options we're going to do today, and you want to kind of reset some things initially, you might want to do things like remove any frame breaks or system breaks you've already put in, if you're playing with things. And if you've got quite a few of these, then selecting them and pressing delete on them can be a bit annoying. So what I would do is, and you can do it from inside write mode, just press Control-A to select everything, use a filter, and at the bottom of the filters there's an all breaks. You can also just choose frame breaks or system breaks. If you choose all breaks, then only those will be selected, and you can press delete and remove them if you want to kind of reset some of those things. The other things to look at, if I'm sometimes sent a file and I want to see what's going on, are in Engrave mode. You'll also have these, which are the system options for the staves, and this is red, so it's showing it's been dragged. And you also sometimes find it with note spacing as well, because you can adjust the note spacing. but you will sometimes, you might have dragged a staff, and actually, especially at the beginning, I would really try not to. So I would either draw a box around these to highlight them. So for example, that one I can remove. I can also do the same for these little ones if I want to, or you can Command or Control select them and you can press Delete, and you can put things back so that you're not, again, those red things are basically overrides. You're overriding things on the page. So you probably want to make sure you don't have those before we look at the other options that we're going to look at today. Let me just have a quick check of, we seem to have quite a few people on today. Let me just check the comments to make sure I've not missed anything. Bear with me a second. I'm just reading down the comments. Bear with me a second. Arpeggiated chords. Yes, I think there is a playback option for those. Use Control Shift P, and I think it's in the timing section. I think. Music frame is the blue line. Yes, the blue box is a music frame. The green box is a text frame. So on this page that we're on here, we've got green ones for text. We've got a blue one which goes all the way around the music. Let me just go back to this one. We can see that. You also get, if you are doing frames over here, then you also have these graphics frames, which are a pinky purple colour that you can add those as well. But really try hard not to do it, unless you're doing a worksheet or a single page, try hard not to do it in here and try to do it in master pages. And maybe we should do other things in master pages at some point. Yes, all of these things that I have looked at in Engrave mode here, anytime you see me go into Engrave mode, they won't be things that you can do in Elements or SE. They are in Dorico Pro, but this was more to explain resetting some things, which if you're not using Dorico Pro, you won't have dragged these things around, you won't have done some of these changes anyway. So initially I'm just looking at resets and master page templates. If you're using Dorico Elements or SE, then you'll be using our default options for those anyway. So you probably won't need to reset them because they won't have moved. Let me just keep going down the comments for a second. Bear with me. And yes, you can't define a template as such at the moment. So for example, in the hub that we have, so in this this section, oops, wrong monitor, you can't define a template in one of these at the moment because of the way they're automatically generated when you click on them. Obviously, you have your recent projects list here, which applies. So what you might want to do is set some of these things up. Like I said, you can import and export master pages, but so for some of the other settings, you might want to save a file as a template, and potentially, for example, if you're on a Mac, you can lock that file so you can't override it, or in any way use that as the start of the project next time. And let me just keep going. Figured base entry at the moment, use the Figurato font, Francesc. If you email me on Discover Dorico at steinberg.de, I can send you some details, but otherwise, if you Google for the Figurato font, that will help you with figured base at the moment. Let me just check. Control Shift P does nothing in Elements. You should get this playback options dialog. If you're in play mode, you can also access it from playback options at the bottom, and there is a timing section in here. I believe, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, please. Yes, there's a fraction of a quarter note for arpeggio lengths. Hopefully that will help. People are answering my questions. Well done, thank you. I should read backwards up these comments because then you know. I know what's already been done. Adjust staff spacing only in a page and not manually. We're going to try really hard not to do manual things here, Luigi, so keep watching. And let me just... Can you copy the master page and just change the pictures of the instruments? Yes, that's more a kind of. I've done a worksheet session of these, Martin, and I think that's probably the kind of thing you want. So yes, what I defined is kind of the areas where the music would sit, and left blank spaces for the images, so that then I could just put the images on for those particular instruments at the end. And yes, Ron, I will try and mention it beforehand as to whether things are going to work in Elements or Pro or SE even. Yes, I'll try very hard to remember. So let's carry on. So the first, actually, Let's go for a little blank project, because then you could potentially also follow along with some of these bits if you wanted to. So what I'm going to add is let's have a piano, and from the groups, let's have a 4-part choir. Actually, I'll put the piano at the bottom. So we've got soprano, alto, tenor, bass. So let's just say we're going to give them some time and some bars, and then we've got this kind of setup. And let's go from here as kind of layouts and options and things. So like I said, today we're going to spend a lot of time in layout options, and so far I apologise, we've not got as far as I would have hoped yet. So you can leave this dialog open if you have a second monitor. Great. All of these layout options are the same in SE Elements and Pro. One of the first things I'd look at when you're looking at spacing type things is, do you need flow headers? Because if you don't, turn them off. However, don't turn them off. If you're in Pro, the temptation is to go into Engrave mode and go to your thing here for frames and select this and press delete. This doesn't help. This doesn't free up the space. It also gives you an override over here, so please don't do that. Occasionally, maybe that's useful, but for this, definitely not. So to remove these flow headers from any mode, go to Layout Options, so Command-Shift-L or Control-Shift-L on PC, and then go to Page Setup, Flows, and use the Show Flow headings, set it to Never. Now here you see, because the flow header has a top margin and a bottom margin, and you can define these if you want to, if you need a bit more space. That's why they still take up space as well if you just delete that little box. So if I apply this, then the flow header will disappear, and now the music fits. So this one in particular now fits both of these systems on the page. And when it's on, for example, for all flows, then I've only got one system on a page. Okay? So that's one of the things, is to kind of, along with the titles, the composer, the copyright, and everything else, is how much space you have on a page. And yes, if you're in Pro, you can see that a little bit more easily if you're in Engrave mode, because you can see the size of the box. If you're not, if you're in Elements, then you'll still find that when you have used the project info, those areas which look hidden to you in Elements, when you fill in these boxes, for example, for composer and copyright, they will populate those areas, and they are taking up space because we're only allowed to put music in the blue music frame. So that's the kind of the first thing, is just space-wise, you might just want to turn off flow headers. If you're only doing one song in this file, turn off the flow headers. There's then staff size type options, which are going to make a difference. So again, in your page setup options here, where you've got your paper size and everything else, you've got space size. Now, Mola and Behind Bars and various other people have recommendations for size of staves. And you can choose a rastral size here. So this is the height in millimeters of the whole staff, top to bottom. And what that works out as is the space size, which is what this little orange arrow is showing you. What's the space size in here? So the space size is 1.75 millimeters, which turns out, once you multiply it by 4, to a 7mm staff, or 19.84 points. If you prefer to see all of this in points, this is where we talked about the preferences. You could change this to points should you want to. You will have to reopen this dialog, and then you will find that everything is now displayed in points, if that helps. So 4.96 points in here, and you can calculate the stuff that way. However, the reason it's normally done in millimeters is so that you can get out a ruler once you've printed the page and say, oh yes, it's showing me a 7mm staff. So if I put that back to millimeters in the preferences, then in the layout options, it will be showing me a 7mm staff. That's the Dorico default. Now, on a score, you could go down to potentially 5mm or you potentially 4.5. Depending on the size and how many instruments you've got and who you're working with and what your paper size is. On a part, you likely to want more like kind of 7mm, which is our default, possibly slightly smaller though. Then you might get 10 to 12 systems on a page for a single staff instrument, but letter and A4 paper really they're not quite big enough for 7mm. So actually often you might want to change this default that we've got, and you can do it either in here by choosing the options, or you can just bump down the staff size. Look, and if you just bump it down slightly, or even type in your own number into here, you'll just get a custom size, because it's you're kind of between them, between the various rastral sizes. But you can bump it down a bit, because maybe 7mm is a tiny bit big. For example, if you're doing choral like this on A4, then the music is generally going to be closer to your face because you're holding it. So maybe 5.5 or 6mm will be fine. Or you can leave it nice and big and with tighter note spacing, and that may also make things fit. So we'll look at that as well. If it's an instrumental part, it depends how far away their music stand is going to be. So that's why you might want to check the kind of Molar behind bar settings or options that they suggest for recommended staff size for things. I'm aware there's a whole bunch of other comments going on. Bear with me a second. There is a page on the website with all the differences between versions of Dorico. And Martin, if you want that worksheet, I'll send it to you. Email discoverdorico@steinberg.de. Let me have a look. When it shows one flow one, how do you get rid of the default one? Yes, Judith, if you want to just edit the flow title, so if you just want to edit this, then in Engrave mode, this is Pro only. If you want to edit it, then you can come down to flow headings and double click on this little option here, which defines the tokens that are used in here. So if you just want the title but not the number, this is where you can remove it. Or if you want to add anything else into here, you can also add extra boxes and extra things in here if you want a big flow header or arranger details, composer details for individual flows. Then you can do that as well. And at the moment we've left that one turned on, but you will need to do that in Dorico Pro. Right. So that's the first thing, was about kind of the spacing type things. And I will come back to some of those spacing things in a minute as to why they're also important. But one of the first things I'd actually often look at with a piece is actually not the kind of staff spacing and that kind of thing. Yes, okay, staff size, but not the spaces between staves. What I might look at initially is, and I'm going to just open another file for this, is the... let me go for this one. What I would look at first is the note spacing. So sort out the left to right spacing first, because that's going to make a difference as to where things sit on a page. Here's an example. Right, let me just put this one back to the default for a minute. So if this is never showing hide empty staves in Dorico, this is another four singers and piano. So on this SATB part, this is the kind of Dorico defaults for a lot of this stuff. Now, what you'll see, for example, in here is because in page setup, the flow header's on, but not being used, it's taking up space, which means it's bumping down, and there's a gap at the bottom, which actually we could put some music in over here, and not that kind of thing. Some of these are a bit close, and you might want to adjust some of these. Some of the staves, there's collisions in here. Some of these collisions and things happen because, Dorico is working out basically what the amount of space is that's needed. And then there are some things like dynamics and spacing with lyrics and various other things that are going to, in the end, need more spacing. For example, here, there's a rehearsal mark at the same time as a dynamic. So sometimes those will add extra space, and you'll actually end up with some pages which are more cramped than you would expect. But one of the things I would look at first, before you kind of start trying to force some of these things apart, is that actually in Dorico, you want to really look at the note spacing options first, because that affects what's on each page. So again, layout options. There's a note spacing section here. The default space for a crotchet or quarter note is 4 spaces. And you can see here in this little table what it's showing me. But actually, if all of your music is crotchets and quavers for me, or quarter notes and eighths, then you can easily actually bump this down to size 3. You've got up and down options here to do, and you can type in fractions or decimals, it doesn't matter, it will convert for you. But you can bump this down even to 3. Also, the minimum space for short notes, if you don't have many short notes, then actually you can potentially bump this down as well. So you might be able to change these note spacing options. There's also an option here for make space for lyrics, and if you don't have many or only have a few, and if they're relatively spaced anyway, then you might not need to make extra space for lyrics. There is also on the lyric spacing options. In fact, let me just show you what this is going to do. So if this was still on 1 3/8, not 13/8, then this piece is going to be, this page, so it's 22 pages for this part. If I change the note spacing just to make things a little tighter and don't change anything else, then this one is going to be 21 pages. So we've got back a tiny bit of space, and things will be slightly tighter, but it's not generally going to be a problem in this case. It will depend how quick your music is. There's also, if you're in Pro, by the way, and you do have a lot of lyrics, in engraving options, there is also in lyrics an option down here for past verse numbers spacing. And so, for example, the minimum gaps between adjacent lyrics, if you could make these tighter, maybe you can get back a bit of space that way as well, if that's important to you. Now, so this file is actually, due to some of the calculations it was then doing, we're going to need to do some manual things. But one of the next things you probably do for kind of vertical spacing type things is work on the vertical spacing section here. But I would probably do this section from the bottom up. So, for example, hide empty staves is going to make initially a big difference. So if you say, actually, in this case, I'm going to say all systems. Often it's after first system. But if I do this, then obviously it's going to make a big difference to this page. Still got some collisions over here, but that we'll need to look at. For example, I quite like A to be at the beginning of the line. So there are still some other things we can change, but hide empty staves obviously is going to make a big difference. In fact, somebody's just said, better hide all the empty staves. That would really remove a lot of pages, Ron. You're right. This piece, in the end, once I've made some changes, added some manual system breaks and that kind of thing, I've actually got this piece in the end down to 16 pages, and just with hide empty staves turned on, it's 20 pages. So there are various changes that you can make. So let's look at some of those as well. So what I'm going to do is show you kind of in a blank project. Now this is a slightly bad idea, but it means that the other music and objects aren't getting in the way at this point, and I want to explain some of the spacing options first. So let's look at some of these vertical spacing options. So in our layout options, I said I'd be in here a lot today, then we have here vertical spacing. I would often start at the bottom of this dialog because this is where your hide empty staves is. At the moment, obviously, for this layout especially, it's a full score layout. I'm not going to use that one. There's also this vertical justification. Now, as a general rule, and I don't want to gloss over this section, but as a general rule, leave this exactly as it is. Don't turn it off. Don't set them to both to 100 and kind of turn it off, because you're going to be adding more manual work for yourself for spacing type things generally. That's probably one of the cases where, if you think differently and you've got specific cases, I'd love to know. Send them to me at discoverdorico@steinberg.de. But as a general rule, don't turn these off. Leave them on. The defaults are 1680. So I'm not saying I'm glossing over that. Also, these are global, so it's not going to help you on an individual page generally either, because it's going to be this whole layout. All of these options you're making are per layout. I suppose that's an important thing to say, is that if you're doing page setup, for example, on the score, or page setup on a part, and you're changing the staff size, and you want all the parts to be the same, don't just choose one part. Use these buttons at the bottom to select all the parts, and then make a change. So, for example, you want to go from 7 to 6mm staves. You make sure you've got them all selected first, because then you'll change all of the parts, not just one of them. Or make sure you have, if you've got more than one score layout, make sure you have the correct or all of those selected as well. So when you're making some of the changes, some of them you want to make just to one part, but some of them you want to make to all of them. Also, this section here, it says minimum gaps, and then it's what we call the collision avoidance, really. This is turned on by default to automatically resolve collisions between adjacent staves and systems. So, for example, here where you've got tempo and notes that are low on the staff, it will add extra space to make sure they don't collide where possible. There's also these kind of things. If you've got in the middle of a system here where you've got some dynamics and some higher notes, for example, then it can also add a tiny bit of space to help out space those kind of things. Now, although I normally have that one on, actually Daniel said to me that for single staff parts, often actually you might not need to automatically resolve collisions. Generally, you'll be okay anyway, and you can potentially just by eyeballing the part, spot to see if there's any small collisions that you can adjust yourself in Engrave mode if you're using Dorico Pro. If you're using elements, then yes, you may well want to leave this turned on, the automatically resolve, so that it's doing that kind of thing for you, because you can't drag things manually because you don't have Engrave mode. So for this one, maybe you want to consider turning it off for single stave parts. This is a full score. I'm going to leave it turned on. And then we've got to this section at the top up here, and this is called ideal gaps. Now, actually, read this as minimum gaps as well. Maybe we should change this word, but actually read that bit as minimum gaps, because what you're setting here is the smallest value that you want to allow, and Dorico is going to add all of these up to make the whole sizing of everything. So, for example, I'm going to show you another slide just for a second. So here's the page. Now it's sort of showing in Engrave mode, but this applies in any version really. Of course, you can't do this in Dorico SE anyway because you've got too many players. You'd only be able to have 2 players, so this would be elements up. But the general spacing things always apply, so that's what I want to explain at this point. So we looked earlier in page setup at the space size that we've got. So 1.75, which means the whole staff is 7 mil, but that's 4 spaces, because in a staff, FACE on treble clef, there are 4 spaces. So that's what we mean by spaces. There are 4 spaces on a staff. So the individual space size is telling you, but there are 4 spaces. So what Dorico is adding up is this from here to here. So I'm looking over here. This is 4. That's what it's calculating. And it's adding all of those up. So 4, 4, 4, 4, and it's adding them all up. Then it's going to the layout options, and now it knows what size these staves are. Then it's looking at the staff to staff gap. So this staff to staff gap here is 6. So it's then putting, it's putting 6 between all of these, and it's adding those up. And then between here's a staff group to staff group is 8. That's the default. So it's now adding all of these up and 8 here, and then it's adding these 2 staves, which are also 4 because they're the same size as everybody else, and this, which says 6, which is this braced staff to braced staff option for 6, and it's adding all of these up. And then it's adding 10 at the bottom because the inter-system gap is 10. So this is the minimum. This is why it shouldn't really be ideal gaps. The minimum amount of space is all of this. That's what this system will take up before it can get another system in underneath. Okay. So once you've added all of those bits up, then that's the reason. If we go back here. And move this off the page for a second. That's the reason that on this page, this system won't fit at the bottom, because there isn't actually enough space. So if you look in Engrave mode, for example, I'll just show you kind of a bit more why. Now you can see there's the copyright details at the bottom. So that's taking up a bit of space. Do you want it or not? Again, well, maybe this would all fit. How can you tell? Well, actually, if you use you don't normally need to do this, but as an explanation of things fitting. So what we've looked at so far is the gaps at the top of the page, all of these text boxes, the blue music frame. Let me just show you the blue music frame here. If I select it, goes up to here, and then it's got the flow header. Then it's got this gap in here, which is the music frame gap. And then it's got all of these individual spacings. And we've just been looking at points. So just for a second, let's go to points. So now it's adding up all of these points. And down here it says that it's 312.2. So that's how much space there is left from the bottom of here to the bottom. Plus you can see here it's showing you what that little gap is at the bottom of the music frame. Okay, so it's saying there is 312.2 spaces left. Now if you were paying attention on the previous slide, let me show you the end of that previous slide. If you'd added all of this up to calculate the number of points, then actually what you get in the end of that is 327.36. And 327.36 is bigger than 311, so it doesn't fit. So that's why this won't fit under here. Okay? So, so what can we do? All sorts of things. So I'll go back to write mode so you can do this in Elements. In our layout options, you can adjust various options. In most of the time, and please, by the way, it was on the top of that slide, normally don't do any of this. Don't do this with a blank staff. Put all the music in first, because obviously the dynamics and notes and things are also going to take effect. But so you can see what's happening with just the staves, when it's just the staves that are there, then you can see what's happening. And actually, Daniel, when I talked to him about this, he said the threshold between one and two systems per page is the worst case. So this is almost the worst case that we're looking to solve, because you've got to balance the staff size, the available space, the heights, and everything else. But generally, these ideal gaps are probably too big. So you could do all sorts of things. You could reduce the staff size slightly. You could reduce the staff to staff size. So if I take this down, for example, to 5. And by the way, you can do increments and decimals and everything in these boxes as well. If I take those down to 5 and apply this, then suddenly I've got enough space for two systems. And all I've done is taken a tiny bit of space out between these staves. I've still got the same amount of space between the piano, but between each individual staff I've taken out a tiny bit of space. If you don't want to do that one, you could also say that, for example, the staff group to the staff group to staff, you'd probably have to reduce that a bit more, because I think there's about 3 spaces. No, it's going to be more than that actually. So that one's not going to make as much of a difference, because all you're doing is adjusting the tiny bit of space in here only once, whereas this staff to staff is adjusting all of the spaces between these staves. There's also the brace staff to brace staff, so that a bit of space in here, and the staff group option. So if we, for example, took a bit of space off that one, again, it fits. Now the piano is slightly tighter. So you can look at just reducing all of these, and I'm reducing whole numbers. You don't have to reduce them in whole numbers, but that will make a difference. And you'll also see if I, for example, increase the staff to staff space, then of course it's going to decrease the amount of space between the systems. I'm not actually changing the inter-system gap, but of course, it's adding the space, and then because the justification is happening, which is this bit, it's going to make things fit on the page anyway. But normally you don't need to play with the justification. You can just fine-tune these spaces. So in many cases it's a case of putting the music all in first. Definitely do that. And then when you're looking to say, how can I make just a bit more music fit on this page, there's a whole bunch of things you can do. Now in this particular case, actually, I'm going to reset to factory here. Actually, oh, by the way, you may also find sometimes that the reset to factory is grayed out. If you're on the wrong layout, if you're on a part layout, then you need to change this to part so that you can use the reset to factory button, just in case that trips anybody up. So with your defaults, in this particular case, I would probably just go in here, remove the flow header, because that's going to give me enough space on the page to make these fit anyway. But you can now hopefully see, even in Dorico Elements, all of these things that are taking up a bit of space, and in most cases you can adjust it from here, from layout options. So we've got the size of your paper obviously is going to make a difference, the staff size is going to make a difference. If you prefer to see things in millimeters, because that's what we would normally do, I'll just reset this so you can kind of check your defaults against what I'm using. So your staff size is going to make a difference. You could just bump the staff size down slightly, and that may make all the difference. Definitely check your note spacing and reduce this, because these are actually quite generous. You can normally get away with actually tighter note spacing than that. And then look at the vertical spacing options, and do you need to maybe reduce the gaps, depending on the instrumentation, between some of these sections. And hopefully these are relatively self-explanatory as to what these are. This is OSSIA ones as well, and there's a timecode one and a tablature one in here as well now. But these are your main 6 that you might want to tweak depending on the instrumentation. So that's normally all you should really need to do to adjust those kind of things. Now, in fact, before I just move on for a second, let me just check in the comments. Oh my goodness, I'm just going to have to scroll up for a second. Bear with me. The make space for lyrics option, no, it shouldn't affect anything if you don't have lyrics. And it's the horizontal, the left to right alignment, or spacing, I should say, the left to right spacing. Because if you have lyrics, then Dorico will respace the notes so that the lyrics fit. Because obviously reading the lyrics is important. You can force 2 systems onto every page. If you really want to. The options I haven't looked at in here, which you can do in any version, is what do we want to look? Sorry, staves and systems, casting off. You can do a fixed number of bars per system. You can do a fixed number of systems per frame. You can do that in Elements as well, and in SE. But in there, yes, they may well be useful in some cases. But the gaps between systems are still going to take effect. So again, you can still end up with collisions and want to know how to fix some of those. But you can't then make it calculate sizes for every individual page, because to be honest, that would look weird. If you ended up with putting lots of music on the page and saying it must fit, then Dorico would have to resize the staff to something to try and make things fit. You can do it manually if you really, really want to. You can add a system break. So I'm going to do this in Pro, but if you're in Elements, you can still add system breaks. So if you add a system break, for example, here, and select it, I can do this in, now I've got it, I can do it in write mode. And you can, actually, maybe you can't do it in Elements. Apologies, you can't do this in Elements. In Engrave mode in Pro, you can select a system break and you can change the space size. So you can make the staff smaller from that point on. So now all of these staves are smaller than these ones. So then you can select this one and you can bump the space size back up to what it was, 1.75 is the default. So you can score layout, which contains all of the instruments, and then you just tick and untick the instruments that you want to be in it. So in this one, for example, I now have an SATB layout, which is a full score layout, which only contains SATB, and I can space that one or work on that one accordingly, as well as I have my full score layout and all my individual parts. So that could be a wind section that you've done, or a brass section, and yes, you then have layout options for any individual layout you've made as well, so you could space that one accordingly. Let me just check these comments again, bear with me. Oh, sorry, Dan. Yes, you got there. I've just visually displayed what Dan said. Thank you, Dan. In galley view, this green line scrolls over the jumps. Yes. So if you're in galley view, when you're doing playback, so galley view being the long continuous one, yes, it will play a page and then it will jump back to the beginning. Maybe at some point we could move the page and keep the line in the middle, but we haven't done an option like that yet. And yes, if you want to do a video, I can see why you want to do that, but we don't easily do that at the moment. And then Dan's replied, sorry. Force 2 systems per page. Well, so Ron, yes, you can sort of do that, but using the casting off. But be careful, because the music might end up a bit cramped. The reductions. So I think, as we've looked at, the reductions, for example, in layout options are for the whole page. Sorry, the whole piece. But yes, you can change the staff size of individual bits if you want to. But I don't use that often, that option very often at all. If you want to use, Nacho's asked a question. If you want to use an iPad to enhance your shortcuts, There are a couple of options. There's a Stream Deck option, there's a Metagrid option, I think you can even use Lima. I tend to just use the keyboard in front of me and assign shortcuts. In fact, I'll show you another couple of options I do for that as well. Reset to factory resets all the options in layout options for the layout you're seeing. I hope that helps. Let me just check. That's good. The live chat's just frozen on one of the windows, but I can read it on the other one. Does page break move along with the system or with the bar? We have frame breaks because you can have. We don't have page breaks. We have frame breaks and system breaks, and they are attached to that position in the bar or the beginning of the bar. Apparently, it's just frozen slightly, but hopefully everything's still going okay. And there we go. Right, so the just kind of last couple of things I want to show you, and then I really will let you go. So in Engrave mode, now this is Pro only. There are options in Engrave mode for dragging the staves. I kind of vaguely showed this earlier. By the way, these options down here in Engrave mode, if you use these a lot and you want to change them, you can set shortcuts for them. There aren't defaults, but you can set shortcuts, for example, to go to the graphical option, the frames editor, the note spacing, and the staff spacing. When you look in the preferences, key commands, if you look in the edit section, then you'll find them, and they're called edit graphically, edit frames, edit note spacing, edit staff spacing. I'm not recommending my shortcut. I've only set them up to show you that you can. I'm not saying I use those or anything else, but you can use those. I suppose because I am only using Dorico, I don't tend to use an iPad or a Stream Deck to set shortcuts. If you're using more than one notation program and you can't learn the shortcuts in two programs all at the same time, maybe one of those devices that kind of aggregates your shortcuts, if you like, always have the same button, might help. But yes, so you can easily change between them. So if you want to go to frames or graphically, or in my case, I want to look at the staff spacing, then I can do that. So this is showing me these options, and there are little handles here. Now you can use these, but generally don't. Most of the time, 90+% of the time, possibly 99% of the time, I don't use these because the overall spacing of things you can sort out using the layout options and some of the vertical spacing and the note spacing. But if you really need to, so for example, if just on this one staff, this alto part needs to be a bit further away because there's music or anything else getting in the way, you can select this one here. You can drag it with a mouse and it's just going to move that one staff. It's not going to move anything else. And you get a little red item. So now when you select the red item, you can press delete, backspace, and put it back to where it's supposed to be. You can also type in these boxes. So if you know for some reason that this wants to be 12.5mm, you can put a specific number in there. If this was points, then you could type a number of points in there instead. You can also use shortcuts for these. You can use Alt down, oops, he says, to move these items. So I can move Alt down here, and I can move that one staff and Alt up again. If I want to move in bigger increments, I can use Command Alt or Control Alt on PC, and I can move the staff that way. So just for individual changes. There is also an option, if I delete that, if I'm using the mouse to drag this and I hold down Alt, it will concertina drag. So you'll see all the staves underneath will also move. And now I've got lots of red markers. And if you need it, if I just undo that, there's also, if you do Alt-J and Alt-K, then those are the shortcuts to do the same thing. Really, don't use those very often. Most of the time, if I'm sent things and people are saying, there's a spacing problem, how can I fix this? It's because things are being dragged manually. For example, and I know it's because there's possibly other music programs that weren't quite as intelligently designed by us. So, for example, this one, you can adjust the entire system look, and I can make it sit over the top of the other one. Maybe this sometimes is why you're getting systems crash into each other. I've been sent files before where people say, oh, I've got these problems and what's going on. Don't instantly jump to dragging things around. Please let Dorico sort it out for you to start off with. And if you can't figure it out, then for at least a limited time, send them to me and I'll have a look at what's going on. But generally, you can reduce your staff size. You can reduce the note spacing because all of these are quite generous, and you can reduce your ideal gaps in here. and those are very likely to solve the problem for you in a global, instead of dragging things around kind of way. Similar, sometimes you need a tiny bit of space in a bar. You can use this same option. In fact, if I put some notes in here, it would help, wouldn't it? So let's just put some notes in. So when you're in Engrave mode, you then have control over each individual rhythm here, and if I just zoom in here, each individual note. So you can move the whole rhythm to the right. I'm using Alt and Command again. I can use this, and I can drag one note back to the left if I need to, while the other, the rest of the rhythms are normal. If you've got a tiny bit of space you need to fit an accidental in that Dorico isn't doing because you've adjusted the note spacing to be so tight, maybe you need to use that option. But generally, don't do it. Don't do that. Don't do that. Should be blue. Because most of the time Dorico should sort those out for you. So let me just have a look at the comments. Oh, that one crashed. Bear with me a second. Collision in the former example. Do you mean the Carol of the Bells that I was looking at? If so, what I did in this file, see there are no collisions in this one. We've done a few things in this one. I've used, for example, system breaks or make into system in some cases. So selecting, for example, the first note and a bar line with command or with control, and then using make into system to define something into a system. I use that more often if, so for example, I think I wanted to push this bar onto the previous page and that kind of thing. I will use make into system for that. And then things that have helped is there's an option only in Pro but in engraving options for these rehearsal marks to make them sit over the top of the systemic bar line. So let me just show you that. Rehearsal marks, where's it gone? Here it is. So position of rehearsal marks at start of system, it's in this horizontal position section, which means that it frees up a bit of space above the bar, above the accidentals, which means it tucks in nicely and doesn't use up so much of the space. So I use that one a bit. Let me just turn off the system breaks, because so you can see all right, I'll leave mine, you can see we've used some. So I've specified where some of the system breaks are, because that's helped with the hide empty staves actually to take up less space overall on this piece. I also have occasionally moved some of the lyrics left and right. So for example, on this page here, actually once I'd adjusted the note spacing, it was actually too tight to get the lyrics in. But in Engrave mode, Pro only, you could adjust the lyrics very slightly left and right to make them fit if you wanted to. So that meant that actually, everything will fit. So that combined with defining where a few sections were and that kind of thing. I've also moved the staves together. I think in this one slightly. So I've reduced the gaps. So if we have a look, for example, in our vertical spacing, the distance between staves is slightly less. Actually, most of the others haven't really changed, but the distance between staves is slightly less as a general rule, plus the lyrics are adding a bit of space anyway. So that's helped. And so now in this one, I don't have any collisions. So those kind of combination of things of deciding what's on pages, making the staves slightly smaller and all that kind of thing has certainly made a difference to this one. Let me just check for any, oh my goodness, some other comments. Bear with me a second. Yes, so Elements is limited to 12 instruments. But yes, all of these things I think are in the guide of on our website of the things that are differences between the two programs. I don't think there is a limited playback options. I think that option is in Elements. Problems to insert an upbeat when importing XML with the upbeat is complete bar with rests. Martin, I'm not sure about that one, send me a file, discover.dorico@steinberg.de. Let's look at that specific case. And yes, the Elements is designed for doing certain things. There are certain things that you can't do in Elements and you will need Pro for. So we in some cases, I suppose we have to put a limit somewhere. So there is an option if you know somebody else who has Pro, they can change some things. For example, you can define a template in Pro. You can define new master pages in Pro as the defaults for that project, and then you can send it to somebody who has elements, and they can use it. So in some cases, find a friend who has Pro, and that might be able to solve it for you. Hopefully, the cross-grade pricing in many cases will also help, because the cross-grade from Sibelius or Finale, and if you also qualify for the education discount, you can have both discounts, of course. And occasionally, as somebody said, we occasionally do sales. So it might depend when you need it. One last option, and this is probably useful mainly for scores rather than anything else, is Pro only, but in Engrave mode. There is an option for staff spacing and copy staff spacing. If you have spent a long time and I'm not sure I agree with this one, but if you really want a left page and a right page to be exactly the same with the staff spacing, because the instrumentation hasn't changed anything else, there's a copy staff spacing, and you can choose a page, and you can choose a page or page range that it will copy the staff spacing to, and Dorico can do that one as well. So that's more useful on a score, probably on an orchestral score. But if you want to have a look at that one, there's a final option for you. So I will carry on reading the comments for a second. I think since I've just managed to top the hour, apologies for that, then I think I'll end the session there. So as always, I'll be reading some of the comments now to see if there's any other questions. They will stop at some point shortly after this video ends. So if you have any questions that haven't been answered in this session, email me on discoverdorico@steinberg.de. I know there were some comments about should we do a video on how to live stream Dorico, for example, what we do on these sessions, or if you're doing a kind of face-to-face call over Zoom, Skype, Hangouts, how do you get the audio from Dorico also through the microphone? There are some loopback options. There are also hardware options for that. If you've got one of our Steinberg interfaces, then there's a loopback option in there as well. I would normally, for all of those, recommend an external microphone if you're doing it, because then you can control the difference in audio between the microphone, for example, the one I'm using, and the Dorico itself, and get the balance. There are also options, for example, in Zoom to make sure you preserve the original audio so you can play music through it. So if you're doing training that kind of way, that might be useful. If you're broadcasting like this, then maybe you want to use Facebook or YouTube and a system like OBS. So maybe we should look at some of those. If you've got questions on those in the meantime, again, drop me a line. I can tell you what I know, what we've used. If there are any questions on what you'd like to see in the next session, I understand most of us are probably going to be at home for a little while. You may well have childcare or other things, but we're around to answer any questions. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on our forum, and as I said, discoverdorico@steinberg.de. You can email me. So thank you for watching this session. Stay well, and we will aim to do another one of these, of course, on probably the last Wednesday of the month, so the last Wednesday of April or thereabouts. Keep an eye on Facebook, and I'll announce exactly when that will be. And let me know, what would you like to see in the next session? So what's the burning questions you've got, or the features you'd like to look at? What would make sense for the next one? And I will see you then. Thank you for watching.